Hello and welcome to another video on calculating the highest common factor of two numbers using prime factorisation. So here it says that 60 is 2 squared times 3 times 5 and 84 is 2 squared times 3 times 7. Now using that information here we can calculate the highest common factor of 60 and 84. So before we do that, sometimes it's easier to write this out in full. Now 2 squared, now you should know what this already means, but if you're not too sure, this just means 2 times 2. So I could rewrite 60 as 2 times 2 times 3 times 5. And also I could rewrite 84 as 2 times 2 times 3 times 7. Now to calculate the highest common factor of 60 and 84, we just need to identify which prime factors both numbers have in common. So we can see that they both have a 2 in common. So we can write down 2. But they also have another 2 in common, so we could say they have a 2 times 2 in common. So they have a 2 times 2 in common. That's not all they have in common. They also have a 3 in common. So they also have a 3 in common. So in total, they've got a 2 times 2 times 3 in common. 60 has 2 times 2 times 3. 84 also has 2 times 2 times 3. And they don't have anything more in common. So the highest common factor is 2 times 2 times 3, which we can just calculate. 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 3 is 12. So what we've effectively done is we've calculated the highest common factor using what we know about prime factorisation. Okay, so let's do another example. Here we've got the prime factorisation of 160 and also the prime factorisation of 104. And we're asked to calculate the highest common factor of 160 and 104. So just like before, I'm going to write it out in full because sometimes it's easier to identify the factors if we write it out in full. So 2 to the power 5, that's the same as 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. We're multiplying 2 by itself 5 times, and then we're multiplying by 5. If we do the same with 104, we've got 2 times 2 times 2 times 13. So what prime factors do they have in common? Well, they've got a 2 in common. So we can write down 2. They've got another 2 in common. So we can write down 2 times 2. They've got another 2 in common. So we can write down another 2. They don't have anything more in common. We've got some 2's here, but we don't have any more in 104. We've run out. And we've got a 5 here, but we don't have a 5 here. And we've got a 13 here, but we don't have a 13 here. So the highest common factor of these two numbers is 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8. Now before I go on, I just want to show you how we can work out the highest common factor without writing these numbers out in full. And it's all to do with our index here. So we just need to identify the smallest number, and that will tell us how many times we need to multiply this number by itself. So here we've got 2 to the power 3, and here we've got 2 to the power 5. So this is our smallest index. So our highest common factor is simply 2 to the power 3. Which is the same as 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8. Because once we've used all these 2's, we haven't got any left over. So even though we've got 5 2's here, we can't use 2 of them because we've run out over here. Okay, so it's over to you now. So pause the video and see if you can calculate the highest common factor of these 4 pairs of numbers. Okay, so the first one, 270 and 72. What do they have in common? What prime factors do they have in common? Well, 270 has got a 2 and so does 72. Well, 72's got 3 2's, but we've only got 1 here, so we can only use one of these 2's. Now let's move on to the 3's. So how many 3's do these numbers have in common? Well, 270 is 3 cubed, and 72 is 3 squared. But remember, we can only use the minimum number of 3's. So we can only use 2 of the 3's. So we're going to multiply it by 3 squared. Even though we've got 3 3's here, we can't use one of them because we only have 2 of them here. We can only use the minimum number. Now, let's move on to the 5's. Well, we've got a 5 here as a factor of 270, but it's not a factor of 72, so we can't use any 5's. So we are done. This is the highest common factor, 2 times 3 squared. Now we just need to evaluate what that actually is. Well, 3 squared is 9. 9 times 2 is 18. So our highest common factor is 18. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So 125 is 5 cubed, and 210 is 2 times 3 times 5 times 7. So what do they have in common? Well, they don't have any 2's in common. We've got 2 here, but no 2's here. We've got a 3 here, but no 3's here. We do have 5's in common. So we've got 1 5 here and 3 5s here. And again, we can only use the minimum number. So we can only use 1 5. And they don't have anything else in common. 270 has 7 as a factor, but 125 doesn't. So all we've got is 5. So our highest common factor is just 5. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So looking at these two numbers, they both have 2's in common, but how many? So we've got 1 2 here and 2 2's here, so we can only use 1 2. And the same with the 3's, we've only got 1 3 here, so we can only use 1 3. Now with the 5's, 9,990 has 5 squared as a factor, and 4,650 also has 5 squared. So they both have 5 squared, so we can use 5 squared, and that's it. We can't use any more factors. There's nothing else in common, so this is our highest common factor. So 5 squared is 25. 25 times 2 is 50. 50 times 3 is 150. So that is our highest common factor. And finally, these two numbers here, what do they have in common? Well, we've got a 3 here, but no 3's here. We've got some 2's here, but no 2's here. And actually, looking at all the numbers, they don't have anything in common. They don't have any common prime factors. Now, the highest common factor is not going to be 0. Remember, what do all whole numbers have as a factor? And the answer is 1. Every single whole number has 1 as a factor. 1 goes into any number. So the highest common factor is just 1. So hopefully that gave you a bit more understanding of calculating the highest common factor using prime factorisation. And in the next video, we're going to do something similar, but instead of looking at the highest common factor, we are going to look at the lowest common multiple. I'll see you in the next video. Take care.